Phillips stood on that conference table like he was announcing the next iPhone launch. Except instead of unveiling some revolutionary product, he pointed straight at me and yelled, "You're done, Mac." Just like that. 20 years of keeping TechGuard systems running. And I got fired in front of 30 people while the kid ate a protein bar and called it eliminating dead weight. I'm Marcus Thompson, 58 years old, and I used to run infrastructure security for TechGuard systems, used to being the key phrase here. I didn't say a word, didn't argue, just pulled the master authentication token from my pocket. The same hardware key I'd carried for 2 decades. The one that opened server rooms, authenticated critical systems, and controlled that basement vault where we kept the backup generators. Held it up like a bartender sliding a drink to a problem customer and said, "Good luck with that." Austin smirked like he'd just conquered Silicon Valley. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that this wasn't just a door key. It was an encrypted hardware authentication device tied to every critical system TechGuard operated. See, Austin wasn't born into this business. He was manufactured in a trust fund factory. You could smell the generational wealth coming off his designer cologne. When his dad Carl stepped back for some spiritual awakening journey, the board reluctantly named Austin interim CEO. The kid immediately started calling himself a digital transformation architect and referring to himself in third person like some kind of corporate prophet. Then came the purge, started that Monday morning by firing Jerry, our company historian who'd been documenting processes since the Clinton administration. Poor guy just nodded quietly and packed his cardigan. Next, Austin slashed the training budget and cut 2 remote workers over Zoom, muting them halfway through their goodbyes. But I was the prize, the power move. Austin needed a scapegoat with a name people recognized. Someone who represented the old way of doing business, needed to prove the legacy mindset was finished. So he took me out like a rusty filing cabinet, loudly, publicly, with maximum theater. I walked past the reception desk, past the shocked interns, past that motivational poster I'd always hated. Innovation drives excellence, and straight to my truck. Didn't drive home right away. Sat in that parking garage staring at that authentication token. It felt heavier than usual. Not the metal itself, but what it represented. Access authority, 20 years of accumulated responsibility that Austin just threw away like a used coffee cup. Then I opened my glove compartment and pulled out the blue binder I'd kept there for emergencies, infrastructure protocols, system documentation, federal compliance matrices. This wasn't some personal vendetta folder. This was institutional memory in 3-ring form. 20 years ago, when TechGuard was still operating out of a converted warehouse, Carl trusted me with access that didn't come with a fancy title, just massive responsibility. I was the designated systems custodian on paper and the guy who actually kept the lights on in practice. I stayed overnight during the ransomware attack in 2017, manually switching servers while the automated systems ran diagnostics. When the Pentagon inspector said our security setup violated 3 different protocols, I spent 2 weeks negotiating variance permits. When vendors threatened to pull contracts over late payments, I smoothed things over with personal relationships built over decades. I had signing authority on infrastructure leases, regulatory compliance documents, and security certifications that Austin didn't even know existed. More importantly, I had the vendor relationships and institutional knowledge to make those signatures mean something. Let him play CEO. Let him fire good people and throw tantrums about legacy thinking. He just eliminated the one person who knew where all the digital bodies were buried. My front door always stuck a little. Foundation shifted during that 2008 earthquake, and I never bothered fixing it. Kind of like that it pushed back when something wasn't right. I kicked it open, dropped my bag by the coffee maker, and sat at my kitchen table. I wasn't processing emotions yet, just running diagnostics. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when something you've built gets handed to someone who thinks compliance is just another software subscription. I went to the hall closet and reached behind the winter coats, pulled down a black binder that hadn't seen daylight since our last federal audit. Inside was everything Austin forgot to ask about during his streamlining. Vendor authorization codes, FISMA compliance protocols, DoD documentation requirements, multi-factor authentication hierarchies, and on page 1 in official government letterhead. Marcus Thompson, designated systems custodian for TechGuard Systems federal contractor certification. When you don't demand corner offices or executive parking spots, people forget what they've signed. But I remembered every late-night conference call with Pentagon auditors, every emergency system patch, every compliance deadline I'd met while everyone else was focused on quarterly earnings. My signature wasn't just on internal documents. It was registered with 4 federal agencies as the primary contact for security clearance verification. The Navy taught me that logistics and supply chains are only as strong as their weakest link. Turned out I wasn't just a link in TechGuard's chain. I was the master connection holding the whole thing together. You don't fire the master connection, you transition them properly. You document the handover. You spend weeks training their replacement. You say thank you and throw a retirement party. But Austin wanted headlines, not process. He wanted disruption theater, not operational continuity. So I started making calls. First call was to Sandra at DataCore Hosting. She picked up on the second ring, voice already tense. Mac, thank God. We've been getting credential verification errors since this afternoon. What's going on over there? I kept it simple and professional. Just letting you know I'm no longer authorized for maintenance overrides on the Tier 3 servers. Dead silence, then typing sounds. But your name's still the primary contact on our federal contractor portal. You're listed as the Compliance Verification Officer. Not my problem anymore, Sandra. You'll need to reach out to someone else. Who? We don't have anyone else in our system. I could hear her typing frantically. Sandra had been managing our hosting relationship for 12 years. She knew how these government contracts worked. One missing signature could freeze millions in billing. Mac, this is serious. If we can't verify compliance status, we have to suspend services pending audit. That's a federal requirement. I understand. You should probably call TechGuard directly. We tried. Got transferred to some kid named Bryce who hung up on us. Second call was to Tommy at SecureNet, our badge and surveillance vendor. He actually chuckled when I told him about my situation. That explains the dashboard alerts we've been seeing. Someone tried rebooting your authentication server around 3 p.m., locked the whole system. They what?
Yeah, looks like they thought it was a Windows machine. Just hit restart when the badges started throwing errors.
Now it's stuck in safe mode and won't accept administrative commands. Tommy had installed our security system back when we moved into the current building. Former Army Signal Corps, knew his way around both military and civilian protocols. We'd worked together through 3 major upgrades and countless small fixes. Here's the thing, Mac. Your biometric signature is hard-coded into the root authentication matrix. Even if I wanted to help them, I can't create new admin access without your physical presence for retinal scan verification. How long until the system times out? 72 hours. Then it goes into full lockdown mode. After that, we're looking at a complete reinstall. New hardware, new everything. Probably 8 weeks minimum, assuming they can get federal approval for the replacement components. I made notes in my binder. Not for revenge, just keeping track of the cascade effects. When you pull one thread in a complex system, everything else starts unraveling in predictable ways. Third call was to Maria at Apex Logistics, our facilities management contractor. She was already frustrated before I explained my situation. The HVAC system's been acting crazy all afternoon. Temperature sensors are giving bad readings, and the backup generators won't accept remote commands. That's because the environmental control system is tied into the same authentication network as everything else. Can you walk me through the override procedures? Maria, I don't work there anymore. You'll need to contact TechGuard for authorization. We tried. They said you were the only one with administrative access to the facility systems. That was the pattern. For 20 years, I'd been the central point of contact for every vendor relationship, every compliance requirement, every system that kept TechGuard running. Not because I was a control freak, but because that's how you maintain security in a federal contracting environment. One person signs, one person is responsible, one person can be held accountable. Austin thought he was firing a middle manager. What he actually did was yank the master key out of a Swiss watch and hand the pieces to someone who'd never seen the inside of a timepiece. Tuesday morning, 7:30 a.m., exactly 24 hours after my termination, the first wave hit. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it from Diana, our executive assistant, who called me from her personal phone. Mac, it's chaos here. Nobody can get into the building. The badge readers are just beeping at everyone. Austin's outside in the parking lot screaming at his phone. The overnight security guard, Bob Martinez, had gone home at 6 a.m. Like always, the automatic lock system was supposed to re-enable badge access at 7 a.m. Instead, it stayed in secure mode because the authentication server couldn't verify any administrative users. 340 employees standing outside in business casual, clustering around badge readers like confused tourists at a locked museum. Austin called Raj, our head of technology and probably the smartest guy in the building, trying to explain the situation over speakerphone. We can't provision new badge access until we transfer the master authentication credentials from Mac's account, Raj said. So do it, Austin demanded. We can't, sir. Mac was the root administrator. Only he could create new administrative accounts without triggering federal security protocols. Can't you hack around it? Sir, he designed it specifically to resist unauthorized access. It's compliant with NIST cybersecurity frameworks and Defense Department tamper-resistance standards. If we try to bypass it, the system will flag us as a potential security breach and notify federal oversight. By 9 a.m., someone had called a locksmith. Professional guy who took one look at the badge readers and shook his head. These aren't mechanical locks, son. This is a fully integrated electronic security system. I can't just drill these out without setting off alarms from here to Washington. Austin finally called the fire department, claiming it was an emergency evacuation issue. The fire chief, a former Marine named Rodriguez, took about 30 seconds to size up the situation. Son, this isn't a fire emergency. This is a management problem. Your people can get out of the building just fine. They just can't get back in. Maybe next time, don't fire your security administrator without reading the manual first. The building stayed locked until 2 p.m. when Sandra from DataCore drove over with an emergency access device she kept for situations exactly like this. Cost TechGuard $8,000 in emergency service fees just to unlock their own front door. By Wednesday, the real problems started showing up. Not the dramatic stuff like locked doors, but the quiet financial bleeding that kills companies slowly. Payroll hit a snag first, not because the money wasn't there, but because our automated systems couldn't verify routing authorization for direct deposits. Every electronic payment required dual authentication, one from the finance director and one from the designated federal compliance officer. That second signature was supposed to come from me. Janet from finance called me Wednesday morning, voice tight with stress. Mac, I know this is awkward, but we need your authorization token for the payroll run. The system won't process without dual verification. Janet, I don't work there anymore. You'll need to update the authorization matrix. That's what I told Austin. He said to just override it somehow. I had to laugh. You can't override federal banking regulations with management enthusiasm. Those protocols exist for a reason. What reason? Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. Every federal contractor has to maintain separation of financial authority. One person controls the money. Another person verifies the transactions. If both signatures come from the same authorization level, it triggers an audit flag. Janet went quiet. She'd been doing payroll for 8 years, but never had to understand the underlying compliance architecture. Why would she? That was my job. How long do we have? Payroll processors give you 72 hours to resolve authentication issues before they freeze the account. After that, you're looking at manual check processing for 340 people. Thursday morning brought the procurement crisis. Our primary component supplier, Continental Defense Solutions, suspended all shipments pending customer verification review. Their automated system had flagged TechGuard as a compliance risk. The issue was simple. Our purchase orders required verification from the designated custodial officer before shipment. For 12 years, that had been me. Now, my digital signature was orphaned in their system, still required for authorization, but no longer valid for new transactions. Continental's account manager, Steve Rodriguez, called to explain the situation. We'd worked together since 2012, building a relationship that had saved TechGuard roughly $300,000 in rush delivery fees over the years. Mac, I want to help, but our compliance department won't budge. Your company fired their verified signatory without updating our authorization database. From our perspective, you guys are operating without proper financial controls. That's because we are, Steve. Can't someone else just sign the forms? Not without going through the full vendor qualification process again. New background checks, new federal verification, new credit review. You're looking at 10 to 12 weeks minimum. What about emergency authorization? Emergency status requires approval from your federal oversight officer. Since TechGuard is flagged as non-compliant, they won't grant emergency status. Steve sighed. Mac off the record, this whole thing looks suspicious from the outside. Companies don't usually fire their compliance officers unless something's wrong. My legal department is wondering if you guys are under investigation. That hit me like a cold slap. The optics were terrible. From the vendor's perspective, TechGuard had suddenly terminated their primary financial oversight officer with no transition plan. In the federal contracting world, that kind of move screams fraud investigation or bankruptcy preparation. Friday brought the call I'd been expecting. Continental Defense's legal department. Mr. Thompson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Continental Legal. We're conducting a compliance alignment review regarding the TechGuard contract and would appreciate a few minutes of your time. Jennifer was thorough and professional, asked specific questions about my role, my termination circumstances, and current access status. I answered everything honestly. Mr. Thompson, according to our records, you were the verified custodial officer for all federal contractor certifications. Is that correct? Yes. And you were terminated without a formal transition of those responsibilities? That's correct. Are you aware of any compliance violations or irregularities that might have prompted your termination? No. I was fired for representing legacy thinking, according to the interim CEO. Long pause. I see. And in your professional opinion, does TechGuard currently have proper custodial oversight for federal contracting requirements? No, they don't. Another pause. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Thompson. We may have follow-up questions. Meanwhile, the crisis was spreading beyond vendor relationships. Sarah Rodriguez, one of the junior analysts I'd been training, called me Thursday evening from her personal phone. Mac, they're blaming everything on you. Austin's telling people you sabotaged the systems before you left. Sarah was smart, maybe the best analyst we'd hired in 5 years. I'd been working with her on advanced compliance protocols, hoping she'd eventually take over some of my responsibilities when I retired. What's the mood in the office? Scared. Nobody knows what's happening. Half the systems are throwing errors, payroll's delayed, and Austin keeps calling emergency meetings where he yells at everyone for not being innovative enough. How's Raj handling it? He's trying, but Austin won't listen to him. Raj told him, we need to bring you back to fix the authentication matrix, and Austin said he'd rather shut down the company than admit he made a mistake. That might not be his choice much longer. What do you mean? Continental's doing a compliance review. If they pull the contract, TechGuard loses 55% of their revenue. Sarah went quiet. Mac, I'm thinking about looking for another job. This place is falling apart. I don't blame you. But wait a few more weeks. Things might change. Monday morning, the hammer fell. Continental's procurement office sent a formal notice to TechGuard. Contract negotiations suspended pending compliance verification review. The $420 million logistics and cybersecurity contract representing roughly 55% of TechGuard's annual revenue was officially on hold. Austin called an emergency staff meeting. I wasn't there, but Diana filled me in later. He stood in the same conference room where he'd fired me and tried to explain why their biggest client had just walked away from the negotiating table. This is a temporary misunderstanding, he told the assembled staff. Continental is being overly cautious about some paperwork issues. We'll have this resolved within the week. Raj, the IT director, raised his hand. Austin, if this is just paperwork, why don't we fix it? We're working on it. Who's working on it? Mac was our compliance officer. We don't need Mac. We can handle this internally with who? You fired the only person who knew how the compliance systems worked. Austin's face went red. We'll figure it out. That afternoon, TechGuard's stock price dropped 18% on news of the Continental contract suspension. The financial press picked up the story. TechGuard Systems loses major defense contract amid compliance concerns. Local business reporters started digging into the details. They found the timeline. Compliance officer terminated Monday, major contract suspended Friday. The optics were devastating. Carl Phillips, the founder, cut his spiritual journey short and flew back from whatever meditation retreat he'd been attending. By Wednesday, he was back in the building having quiet conversations with board members and looking like a man who just discovered his house was on fire. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my kitchen reading the news coverage and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, just professional concern for the 340 people who were about to learn that leadership failures roll downhill fast. The final board meeting wasn't on any public calendar. No corporate communications, no press releases. This was the kind of meeting that happens behind closed doors with phones left outside and voices kept deliberately low. I knew about it because Linda, the general counsel, called me Thursday evening. Mac, I need to ask you some questions for the board. Can you come in Friday morning, 9 a.m.? Am I being subpoenaed? No. Nothing like that. We just need your professional assessment of the current situation. I showed up wearing my best suit. Navy dress blues taught me that how you present yourself matters when the stakes are high. The boardroom felt different than it had during my firing. Quieter, more serious. Carl Phillips sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Austin was there, flanked by legal counsel and what looked like a stack of documentation with my name highlighted throughout. Linda started with the basics. "Mac, can you walk us through your role as systems custodian for 25 minutes?" I explained the compliance architecture I'd built over 20 years. Federal contractor requirements, vendor authorization matrices, financial oversight protocols. The board listened without interrupting, taking notes. "When you were terminated, was there any transition of these responsibilities?" "No. I was told to clean out my desk and leave immediately." One board member leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, in your professional opinion, can TechGuard currently fulfill its federal contracting obligations?" "No, sir. Not without significant remediation and reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader-reader- vendor qualifications, new federal oversight approval. And that's assuming no compliance violations are found during the review process. Carl asked the question I'd been expecting. What would it take to fix this quickly? You'd need me to come back and execute a proper transition. But even then, the damage to vendor relationships and client confidence would take years to repair. Austin finally spoke up. This is all being blown out of proportion. We can hire consultants to handle the paperwork. Linda slid a folder across the table. These are the estimates from 4 different compliance consulting firms. Minimum cost $4.2 million, Jana. Timeline 18 to 24 months, and that's with no guarantee that federal agencies will accept the transition. The room went quiet. You could hear the HVAC system cycling, the same system that was still throwing temperature alerts because nobody knew how to reset the authentication protocols. There's one more thing, Linda continued. The SEC has opened a preliminary inquiry into the Continental contract suspension. They want to understand why a major federal contractor suddenly terminated their compliance officer without documentation. Carl's face went gray. Are we under investigation? Not yet. But the optics are terrible. Companies don't usually fire their oversight officers unless something's wrong. The SEC is wondering what we're hiding. The board session continued for another hour without me. I waited in the lobby reading magazines and watching employees hurry past with the nervous energy of people who know layoffs are coming. Carl found me there around noon. Mac, I want to apologize. What Austin did was wrong and the way he did it was inexcusable. I appreciate that, Carl. I also want to offer you your job back, full reinstatement, promotion to VP level, whatever it takes. I'd been expecting this conversation. Carl, I can't come back. Why not? We need you. Because in 6 months or a year, when things stabilize, Austin or someone like him will decide I'm legacy thinking again. I can't build my retirement around someone else's definition of my value. Carl nodded slowly. What if I guaranteed that wouldn't happen? You can't guarantee anything. You stepped away once and look what happened. That afternoon, TechGuard's board voted to remove Austin as interim CEO and reinstated Carl as active chairman. The press release was carefully worded. Leadership transition to ensure operational continuity during a period of strategic realignment. Corporate speak for we fired the boss's son before he burned the place down. I spent the weekend setting up Thompson Security Solutions. Rented a small office downtown, had business cards printed, registered with the State Business Bureau. Nothing fancy, just professional. Monday morning, my phone started ringing. First call was from Steve Rodriguez at Continental Defense Solutions. Mac, I heard you're consulting now. We've got 5 clients asking about compliance verification services. Interested? Second call was from Sandra at DataCore. Mac, our other federal contractor clients are nervous about their compliance status. Can you do audits? By Wednesday, I had 7 clients signed and 4 more scheduled for consultation. Word travels fast in the federal contracting world, especially when a major company implodes over compliance issues. TechGuard struggled for months. Carl managed to stabilize operations, but the Continental contract was permanently lost. They had to lay off 120 people and sell their government contracting division to stay solvent. Austin disappeared from the local business scene. Last I heard, he was running a blockchain startup in Denver, telling people he was a disruptive technology specialist. 8 months later, I was sitting in my expanded office reviewing proposals for a $65 million federal modernization contract when Diana called. "Mac, Carl Phillips is here. Says he wants to hire Thompson Security Solutions for compliance oversight." I looked out my window at the TechGuard building across the street. Still there, still operating, but smaller now, humbled. "Tell him I'll call him back," I said. I'm booked solid for the next 8 months. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being too busy to return phone calls. Look, if you're over 50 and working in corporate America, you've probably seen this movie before. Some hotshot kid gets promoted above their competence level and decides the problem with the company is all the people who actually know how to run it. Maybe you've been in meetings where 20-year veterans get lectured about innovation by someone who thinks institutional knowledge is just dead weight. Here's what I learned. Your expertise has value, whether or not your current employer recognizes it. The market always knows what real competence is worth. Don't let anyone convince you that experience is obsolete just because they've never had to clean up after their own mistakes.